In the village of Ndalani, where ancient baobab trees stretched their roots like old fingers beneath the red earth. And every evening the wind carried stories from one generation to another. There lived an old woman named Naserian. Children lowered their voices whenever they passed her lonely hut. Hunters avoided looking toward her compound after sunset. Even the bravest elders, men whose faces carried the scars of lions and war, never spoke her name loudly once darkness settled across the land. They simply called her the keeper. No one remembered exactly when she had arrived. Some claimed she had always been there, older than the oldest tree. Others whispered that she had once been a beautiful bride who vanished into the forest after losing everyone she loved. Whatever the truth, one rumor survived every generation. Death itself lived inside a calabash she guarded more fiercely than any mother protected her child. The calabash rested on a woven mat in the center of her hut. It was neither large nor decorated with precious beads. Its surface was plain except for strange markings that no one in the village could read. Every dawn, Naserian wiped away its dust with a clean cloth. Every evening, she placed fresh herbs around it, while murmuring words too ancient for anyone to understand. Villagers believed those whispered prayers kept something terrible asleep. They dared not ask questions because questions had a way of inviting trouble. Life in Idalani was peaceful despite the mystery. Farmers tended fields of millet and sorghum. Women sang together beside a river while washing colorful cloth. Children chased goats through winding paths, laughing until the sky turned orange with sunset. Yet death rarely visited the village. Seasons passed without funerals. Old people whose backs had bent beneath decades of labor remained alive. Sick children often recovered when everyone expected them to fade away. Travelers noticed this strange blessing and wondered why such a remote place seemed untouched by the sorrow known everywhere else. Among those travelers was a young hunter named Jabari. Unlike the elders, he had not grown up fearing old tales. His father had died fighting raiders from another kingdom, and his mother often reminded him that courage meant questioning fear rather than obeying it. Jabari possessed a sharp mind and an even sharper spear, but curiosity burned brightest within him. Every unanswered question felt like an itch beneath his skin. Whenever he returned from hunting, he watched Naserian from a respectful distance. She walked slowly, leaning on a carved wooden staff, yet her eyes remained astonishingly bright. They missed nothing. She greeted every child kindly, offered herbs to mothers with feverish babies, and quietly repaired broken baskets for widows who had no family left. Nothing about her behavior resembled the wicked witch described in frightened whispers. Still, no one accepted her kindness without suspicion. One evening, as crimson clouds drifted across the horizon, Jabari found his grandmother sitting beneath the oldest baobab. She was threading colorful beads into a necklace, with hands weathered by nearly 90 rainy seasons. He asked the question everyone else avoided. Grandmother, why does everyone fear the old woman? She has never harmed anyone. The old woman stopped working. Her fingers trembled slightly. Because some burdens are too dangerous to understand, she answered. What burden? She looked toward Naserian's distant hut. The burden of keeping death asleep. Jabari almost laughed, but the fear in his grandmother's eyes silenced him. When I was younger than you, she continued softly, my own grandfather warned me never to touch that calabash. He said our ancestors trapped death inside it after a terrible age when people died faster than crops could grow. Only one soul was chosen to guard it. Every generation, the guardian passed the duty to another. If death is tracked, Jabari asked, why do strangers still die beyond our village? His grandmother sighed. Not all mysteries belong to us. The answer satisfied everyone except Jabari. Days became weeks, and curiosity slowly transformed into obsession. He watched Nasserian's daily routine until he could predict every movement. She never left the calabash unattended, except during the few moments she collected water before sunrise. Even then, she hurried home as though every heartbeat mattered. One morning, heavy clouds gathered unexpectedly. Rain crashed upon the village with unusual violence. Rivers overflowed, trees bent beneath fierce winds, and frightened animals ran wildly through the muddy paths. While villagers struggled to protect their homes, lightning struck the great baobab beside Nasserian's hut. Enormous tree split apart with a thunderous crack blocking her doorway. Jabari rushed forward with several young men to remove the burning branches. Together they cleared the entrance just as Nasserian emerged, clutching the calabash tightly against her chest. Her face, usually calm, revealed genuine terror. You must never let this fall, she pleaded. The hunters exchanged confused glances. I can carry it, Jabari offered. Her expression hardened immediately. No, it is only a calabash. Her voice became sharper than any spear. It is everything. The storm ended by evening, but Jabari could not forget the fear he had seen. It was not the fear of losing an object, it was the fear of losing the world itself. That night, sleep refused to visit him. His thoughts circled endlessly around the mysterious vessel. If the old stories were lies, why had Nasserian looked so terrified? If they were true, why would anyone imprison death? Was death truly evil, or did it serve a purpose greater than human understanding? Curiosity soon disguised itself as noble intention. Barry convinced himself that secrets created suffering. Perhaps the villagers lived in unnecessary fear because no one dared discover the truth. If he opened the calabash and found nothing, generations would finally be free from superstition. If something truly existed inside, then everyone deserved to know. The following dawn, Nasiriya left for the river carrying empty water gourds. For the first time, Jabari ignored every warning echoing in his memory. Hidden behind tall elephant grass, he waited until her small figure disappeared beyond the trees. His heart pounded as he stepped toward the lonely hut. The air felt strangely heavy. Birdsong ceased. Even the wind seemed unwilling to cross the threshold. Inside the dim room, sunlight slipped through tiny cracks in the walls, illuminating the simple woven mat at the center. There it rested exactly as every story had described. The plain calabash appeared disappointingly ordinary. No glowing light escaped its surface. No terrifying sound emerged from within. It looked like something any farmer might use to store grain. Jabari laughed quietly at his own fear. He reached forward. Instant his fingers touched the smooth shell, a coldness unlike anything he had ever known rushed through his body. The hut became unnaturally silent. Somewhere outside, a dog began howling, then another, and another. Before he could pull his hand away, the lid shifted ever so slightly beneath his trembling fingers. The lid slipped from the calabash with a hollow crack that echoed far louder than such a small object should have. At first, nothing happened. Jabari stared into the darkness inside, expecting to find smoke, bones, or some hidden trick. Instead, a cold wind rushed upward, carrying whispers that sounded like thousands of distant voices speaking at once. Shadows poured from the opening like black mist, swirling around the hut before racing into the sky. The ground trembled beneath his feet. Side birds burst from the trees in frightened flocks, and every dog in the village began barking without pause. Jabari stumbled backward, dropping the calabash onto the woven mat. The shadows disappeared beyond the rooftops, leaving an unbearable silence behind. Then he heard hurried footsteps. Nasirian stood in the doorway, her water gourds shattered at her feet. Her face had turned pale. "You opened it," she whispered. "I only wanted to know the truth." Tears filled the old woman's eyes. The truth has now become everyone's burden. She knelt beside the empty calabash, gently lifting it into her arms. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she looked toward the village, where frightened cries were beginning to rise. Death is free. That very evening, an old man who had been healthy only hours before collapsed while walking home. Before sunrise, a child, struck by a venomous snake, ever awoke. By the next day, livestock weakened without warning, and fever spread through homes that had not known sickness for generations. Panic swept across. The villagers searched for answers, but Naserian remained silent until the council gathered beneath the ancient baobab. There, before every family, she finally revealed the secret she had guarded all her life. "Long ago," she said, "our ancestors captured death after it began taking lives without mercy. They believed the world would know only joy if death were imprisoned. For a while, they celebrated. No one died, but they soon discovered another curse. The old could not rest, the sick could not find peace. The land became crowded, and suffering lasted without end. Death was never meant to disappear forever. It was meant to be kept in balance." The villagers listened in stunned silence. "I became its keeper," she continued, "not to imprison it forever, but to release only the little that the world could bear. Every sunrise, I loosened the lid for a single breath, and every sunset I sealed it again. That is why life remained balanced." Jabari lowered his head, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "I thought I was freeing the village from fear." "You freed fear itself," Naserian replied gently. "Curiosity without wisdom often destroys what it hopes to save." Ashamed, Jabari stepped forward before the council. "This is my fault. Tell me how to fix it." The old woman studied him for a long moment before answering. "There is one way. Death always returns to the place where it was first captured. Beyond the Black Hills lies the Valley of Echoes. Before the next full moon, you must find death and convince it to return willingly. If you fail, the world will never know balance again." Without another word, Jabari picked up his spear and small travel bag. As frightened villagers watched in silence, he walked toward the distant hills, carrying the weight of every life now hanging in the balance. Jabari left Nadalani before the first lights of dawn reached the tops of the baobab trees. No villagers came to wish him safety. They watched from their doorways in silence, unsure whether they were seeing a brave young man seeking redemption or the fool whose curiosity had invited suffering back into the world. He did not blame them. Every step away from the village felt heavier than the last, burdened by the faces of those who had already been lost. The journey toward the Black Hills was unlike any hunt he had ever undertaken. The forest seemed strangely alive, whispering through its leaves, as if unseen spirits were following his every movement. Rivers that had once flowed gently now surged with violent currents, and the songs of birds had been replaced by an eerie stillness. Nature itself seemed unsettled, struggling to adjust to the sudden return of a force it had long been denied. For 3 days, Jabari walked without finding another traveler. Hunger gnawed at him, and sleep came only in restless moments beneath twisted trees. Each night he dreamed of the black mist escaping from the calabash, always waking just before it swallowed the village. The dreams reminded him that every hour he delayed gave death more time to spread its shadow across the land. On the fourth evening, he reached the Black Hills. Their dark stone cliffs rose into the clouds like the walls of an ancient kingdom abandoned by time. At their base stood a narrow path leading into the Valley of Echoes, where every footstep returned as a dozen whispers. The air was cold by the blazing sun above, and a strange fog drifted across the ground. As Jabari entered the valley, he heard voices calling his name. Turn back. You are too late. Cannot undo what has been done. He tightened his grip on his spear, refusing to answer the voices. Assyrian had warned him that the valley fed upon guilt and regret. Anyone who listened too long would lose themselves before reaching the end. After hours of walking through the mist, he came upon an ancient stone circle. At its center stood a figure cloaked in darkness. It had no clear face, only shifting shadows where eyes should have been. Yet his presence filled the valley with overwhelming silence. You have come far, the figure said, his voice sounding both old and young at once. You are death, Jabari answered. I am what every living thing eventually meets. Jabari lowered his spear. I came to ask you to return. A deep laugh echoed through the valley. Return. You humans trapped me because you feared me. Then another human released me because he feared ignorance more than consequences. Why? Why should I trust your kind again? Jabari could find no easy answer. I was wrong, he admitted. I believed removing death would create happiness. I never understood that life has meaning because it does not last forever. The shadow remained silent. My village is suffering because of my pride, Jabari continued. If someone must carry the burden again, let it be me. For the first time, the darkness began to change. Two faint eyes appeared within the shadow, watching him carefully. You would spend your life guarding the balance you once destroyed. The valley fell completely still. At last, the shadow extended a single. Resting upon its palm was the same plain calabash, no longer empty, but quietly humming with unseen power. The old woman has carried this burden for many years, Death said. Her time is ending. Yours is about to begin. Jabari accepted the calabash with both hands. It felt warm, surprisingly light, yet he understood that no object had ever carried greater weight. When he returned to Endailani, the villagers gathered around him as Naserian stepped forward with a peaceful smile. She placed her wedded hand upon the calabash one final time before turning to the people she had protected for decades. Remember this, she said softly. Life and death are not enemies. They walk together, and because they do, every sunrise is precious. Every embrace has value, and every goodbye teaches us to love more deeply. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, Naserian closed her eyes for the last time. Her passing was quiet, without fear or pain. The villagers did not weep in despair, as they once might have. They understood her sacrifice at last. From that day forward, Jabari became the new keeper. Each dawn, he released only enough for the world to remain in balance. And each evening, he sealed the calabash once more. The people of Endalani never forgot the lesson carved into their history. The greatest dangers are not always born from evil, but from good intentions guided by pride instead of wisdom. And whenever children ask why the keeper guarded an ordinary-looking calabash with such devotion, their parents simply smiled and answered, because some gifts become curses when we refuse to understand why they were given.